March 18th, 2020. As we start, I'd like to acknowledge the land, traditions, and culture of four nations, the Secwepemc, the Ktunaxa, the Snaixt, and the Syilx. We acknowledge our use and inhabitation of this land, sacred to these four nations. We respectfully honor their traditions and culture. So today's topic is amazing photos from the archives. We have probably close to 10,000 or more photographs in our collection. And this is just a little sample of some that I find intriguing, some that are just amazing photographs or interesting for some reason. This is a photograph taken on the bank of the Columbia River at Revelstoke, probably in the early 1900s. I'm going to say probably about between 1905 and 1910. This is Shella Dickey and her aunt Della Smith and cousin Ephraim Smith. And this building right here is the little sawmill, Riverside Sawmills, that was located where the community center is now. So it's interesting to see what the land looks like around the riverbank at that time. When we're looking at this, we can realize that at one time, probably close to where they are, would have been the location of the smelter. There was quite a bit of land that eroded into the river. There's also a little point, you can see a little spire right there. That would be the St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church, where the Catholic Hall is located now at the corner of 5th and Mackenzie. And big building right here, that's where Coal River Manor Apartments is now. That was the skating rink. This is also an interesting photograph of a local fellow named Charlie Leonard, and he had a team of oxen. There was a few farmers in town that had oxen as part of their farming operations. This is probably taken close to Victoria Road. There's Mount Revelstoke right in behind. The date on this one would be about 1919 or 1920. It was taken by Emma Roberts. I think quite a few of our next few photographs were taken by Emma Roberts. She was here in the early teens and 20s and living close to, in between First Street and Victoria Road, probably on Connaught Avenue, and took a lot of photographs of this area, including a lot of photographs of Mount Revelstoke at the time. This is another one from her collection, the inside of the courthouse. So we've got lots of photographs of the outside of the courthouse during construction. This one is during construction, but so this one was taken 1913, and you can see there's a ladder there, but you can see some of the beautiful features of the interior starting to take shape in this photograph. This is an event that happened coming up to 100 years ago in June of this year. There was 4 young people who were out on a boat on the Columbia River at the end of June 1920. A young man named Walter Nelson and 3 young women, Bella Lawton, age 20, Muriel Armstrong, age 18, and Marjorie Cleland, age 14. And they were going out just for boating on the river. They were close to the Wing Dam, and you can still see the Wing Dam today if you if you're at the community center and looking up the river. You can see coming up from Front Street, it was this rock dam that was built to divert the river from eroding the riverbank. And in the high water, I guess they were trying to sort of get the edge of the ripple around the edge of the Wing Dam and go over the dam to get a little bit of air. But unfortunately, the boat hit the dam and overturned, and all 4 of the young people were were drowned, and I don't think that more than one or two of the bodies were ever recovered, but they had this ceremony, memorial ceremony, and you can see the people gathered there. This is just near the south end of Front Street. It's another picture from the Roberts album, catching redfish on the Tum Tum, also known as the Tonkawattla River, in 1920. And a really interesting photograph from her collection, taken at St. Leon Hot Springs around 1920. And St. Leon at that time was a really developed hot springs area. They had a fairly big hotel there, hotel complex. So a lot of people would go down there for day trips or for longer trips, stay at the hotel and enjoy the hot springs. And it's an interesting photograph of a tame deer taken there. Also, another one from her album, but dating to about 1914, of a caribou hunt 80 miles up the Big Bend. Of course, caribou were quite prolific in the area around here at that time. I've read accounts of people traveling up the Big Bend and having to wait for over an hour for a caribou herd to cross in front of them before they could continue. These are some of the boathouses on the Columbia River, just off of Front Street. This is also taken about 1920, an Emma Roberts photo. So there were quite a few people that had boats that were tied up at that area. And there's the wing dam. So this picture would have been taken probably in the fall of 1919, and this is when the water was quite low. So you can see how it's built out from Front Street, and as I said, the purpose of it was to divert the water from eroding the riverbank, because erosion was quite a serious problem at that time. This was probably built in the late 1890s. There's the construction of the Queen Victoria Hospital. Of course, anybody who was born in Revelstoke before 1970 was born in the brick Queen Victoria Hospital. And they were building it between 1912 and 1913 when it opened. You can see they're just in the process there, all the bricks piled up as they're doing the work. Some of the bricks still exist in various places around town, including in the back brick posts of our Heritage Garden. And I believe that this building behind the hospital was the nurses' residence. And that time they had a nurses' training school operating in Revelstoke as well. This picture is taken on 7th Street East, and this is actually the playing ground of Selkirk School. So this would be now land on part of the Selkirk Gardens property. You can actually see there's a goalpost there. So you can see some of the houses in the neighborhood. At the time that they built Selkirk School in it opened in 1911, they were debating the location in 1910, and there was a huge uproar in the city. The city owned this block of land, so that was an area that they were considering for building the school. But a lot of people were really concerned as to why the city was building a school on the outskirts of town, because now, of course, 6th Street is sort of right in the middle of the downtown neighborhood. But at that time, there wasn't much. In 1910, there wasn't much built around there yet. But that is where Selkirk School was built, and it opened in 1911. Moving buildings, this is something that they did all the time in Revelstoke. It was very common practice, especially when a lot of the original store buildings were built on Front Street, and then people wanted to relocate up to the new sort of business area of Mackenzie and First. So people just moved buildings all the time. There were houses that were built around the downtown area, and they were moved out of the way as well. But this one is moving up onto First Street East around 1920. And you can see that they they took the roof off to do the move. They've got a team of horses and poles there underneath as they're moving it along. This is the Revelstoke Hotel. It was built as the Selkirk Hotel, later became the Revelstoke. That's now part of the Regent Inn. Just put a few pictures of some train wrecks. This is a 1921 freight train wreck, and you can see some of the goods that were on the train sort of by the side. Something that we've just done in the archives is we have digitized our accident reports going back to 1909 and up to 1935. So major incidents are all recorded and digitized now for if people wanted to look up a specific event or even sort of see the frequency of major incidents at around that time. This is a wrecked engine of 3214 around 1921. And I don't know the story around that one. That's one that I'd have to look up. And again, it's a picture. This says, "Oil cars over the ramp at Field, 1921. That was the caption on that photograph. So there was definitely a lot of incidents that happened in the operation of the railway back then. This is an interesting one from the Emma Roberts album. There's a picture of this couple and their little dog, and the caption mentions the fact that when the engineer saw this couple, they realized that this person was a woman, so they actually allowed them to ride on the train. They called it beating the rods or riding the rails. That's where the term hobo came from, is sort of the people who are riding the rails. Look at their boots. They're actually quite well dressed. But that was very common for people to sort of try to catch a ride on a train, a freight train going by. This was a washout that happened probably around the 1914 era. Just around Three Valley, and you can see it's quite a serious washout, so they're rebuilding there. And again, rebuilding the bridge at Three Valley. This says, Frank McCarty's car being towed for winter storage, 1919. Frank McCarty was the first mayor of Revelstoke, and their house is what's now McCarty Bed and Breakfast at the corner of 3rd Street and Mackenzie Avenue. People who did have cars would usually put them away for the winter back then. The first recorded car that we have in Revelstoke was 1907, and this is, say, 1919, and quite a few people did have cars, but it was very unusual for them to try to keep them out for the winter. There wasn't a lot of places you could go. There were, by 1919, there were still no roads out of Revelstoke. The road to Sycamoose wasn't open until 1922. The road to Golden wasn't open until 1940. This is an interesting photograph of an Orangeman's Day parade coming down Douglas Street, July 13th, 1908. The Orange Lodge had a convention that year, so they invited Orange Lodge members from a lot of the surrounding areas to come, and they had a big convention here. And as part of it, they did this parade. Some of the symbolism of the Orange Lodge involves a white horse. And so there you've got the white horse. And this is actually coming down the hill on Douglas Street. You can actually see there's a little bit of bridge work that was built on Douglas Street at that time, coming down the hill. This is one of those photographs that I just find really intriguing, because we don't really know exactly what's going on here. We believe this is at top of Mount Revelstoke, probably sometime in the early 1920s, but this definitely appears to be a grave. You can see some stones around this little mound, and there's a wooden cross, looks like a marker of some sort, and that person has a book, possibly a Bible. So there's something solemn going on there. We don't know if is that a human burial? Is it an animal burial?
There's a fishing lure on the cross as well. I noticed recently.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a shiny silver thing hanging. It's a lure.
Oh, okay, I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is one of many intriguing photographs in our collection. There's the tennis club. Revelstoke actually, different periods of time had two tennis clubs because there was the big rivalry between Lower Town and Upper Town. So at one point there was a Lower Town tennis club and an Upper Town tennis club. This one we believe was at somewhere at the base of Douglas Street, and because there's a business there, it's George Terryberry, General Blacksmith, and we know that he had his blacksmith shop somewhere near the base of Douglas Street. We believe that this is Lida Holton, and or at that time she would have been Lida Edwards. That's possibly Guy Barber. That looks like a man named T.L. Haig. I'm not positive of those identifications, but they were certainly part of the tennis club at that time. So this is a picture of downtown Revelstoke in 1904. You can see there's not a heck of a lot going on there yet. So when they were talking about in 1909, 1910, building the Selkirk School on the outskirts of town, that's what they meant. It really was the outskirts then. Here's Mackenzie Avenue. There were some business buildings on this side of Victoria. This was a building, you can see that there's a false front on front of it. This was McCarty's butcher shop, and there was a couple of other businesses in as well in there, Lawrence Hardware and a drugstore. You can see the smoke over in this end and a little bit of a stack. There was the Revelstoke Sawmill, which was just beyond the 4th Street crossing on Victoria, what's now Victoria Road. There's a little building there that is where Brewski Park is now. That was a little apartment building, but not too much going on yet. The town was just really starting to take off in this the upper part of town. This is a photograph that confused us for quite a while. We had to take it out for walks a few times to try to determine the location. There was a few things that confused me about it. You know, just the buildings there, that thing that looked like a giant doghouse. But what we finally figured out is that it was a construction of the gas station at first in Campbell. And once we researched and discovered that that's what it was, we're actually able to, through newspaper articles, pin it down to almost an exact date of when they were doing the construction. So it would have been the summer of 1936. So this is Campbell Avenue, and the reason we've got all those buildings there is because there was a spur track on the east side of Campbell Avenue that went to what used to be the smelter at beyond the end of Campbell Avenue, and for years the spur track remained, and there were coal sheds and warehouses along there as well. So this is 2nd Street here, and this building back and behind with the 3 windows was the city jail. It was built in 1908. This is the location where they built the Parks office and the post office in that block. So when they were preparing for that, they actually moved that, and it's now on Carlson Street near the Yellow Silhouette River. And the big doghouse was actually a weigh scale. And the building on this corner was a blacksmith shop. This is a picture taken in the early 1900s of a bridge collapse at Twin Butte. And since I first put the slideshow together, I was able actually to find out a little bit. There was, I think it was about 1904 that this happened. So you can see it's a pretty serious event, and took quite a bit of work to rebuild that bridge. There's a upturned wash basin on this end, which makes for an interesting photograph. we've got several pictures of record loads of lumber. This isn't even actually the biggest one we've got. We've got another one that was taken around Arrowhead a couple of years later than this. But this was a record load in 1906 at Fish River Camp, which would have been just up the northeast arm of the Upper Arrow Lake, just around from Arrowhead. And the photograph was by Tucker, who was doing a lot of photographs in the area at the time. This is just a cute picture. We don't have a lot of context about it or who the people were, but it's Women on Handcar at Greeley, 1906. And of course, women did a lot of things, but they had to do them in long dresses and clothing that it was not the easiest to move around in. And there's a man on a velocipede, 1909, and F. St. C. Farron. I don't know anything about him, but it's an interesting little contraption, the velocipede. This photograph was taken at the fairgrounds, which is now where the golf course is, probably around 1912. And we did find a record of a large caribou that had been shot and was put on display at the fall fair. So this is probably that event, and it did take place in 1912. You can see this big structure here. This was the grandstand for the horse races that took place at the golf course. They actually built a horse race racing grounds there with the grandstand. And what's now the golf clubhouse was built as the agricultural hall, and the cupola in the golf clubhouse was the viewing area for the judging for the horse races. The lookout point at Albert Canyon, and it's called Albert Canyon because of the canyon, and the passenger trains used to stop there. They had this walkway built, the observation platform, so people could get out of the train and walk up and actually see down into the canyon at the time when passenger trains ran. So the question we get quite often is, when did they stop? It was about 1990 that the passenger service stopped on the CPR line. This is just another kind of an astounding photograph. It was taken of the IOF Lodge, also known as the Oddfellows Lodge at Trout Lake in 1902. And this is Trout Lake. That wasn't a huge community, but look at the size of the building. That is a false front. You can see the roof line there, but even so, it's a pretty substantial building and quite a number of people there. By 1902, there were at least 2 hotels running. One of them was the Windsor Hotel that is still in Trout Lake, and it was run for many years by Alice Jowett, who was really famous resident of Trout Lake, both for running the Windsor Hotel and also being probably one of the most successful miners in the region. This is a picture that always confuses us because it's from a postcard that's marked CPR Bridge over the Columbia at Revelstoke, and that's clearly Mount McPherson. So we're pretty sure it is actually Revelstoke, but this is the only photograph I've seen of a covered bridge here. It probably didn't last for very long. We know that there had been a bridge replacement about 1908, so it could be that they built it as a covered bridge for some period, but we're not sure why or for how long it was in place. This is the CPR station lunch counter in the 1920s. It's very classic 1920s design, where the magazines, McCall's magazines, with pictures of the celebrities of the day. There's a sign for Bovril and Coca-Cola. Just a neat little picture, little cake plates and coffee urns. There was a lot of mining that went on in the area between here and Glacier and up to Rogers Pass. Illicellewaet and Albert Canyon were both mining areas, and so at Illicellewaet there was actually quite a few people who had mining claims in the region, and this is a little hotel that was running at Illicellewaet in 1898, the Windsor Hotel. Lovely picture. And a cute little dog sitting there with a man and boy. I was talking about moving buildings. Here's another one. This is 1910. This came from some glass negatives that came from the Smythe family. Roy Smythe had the cigar store, which was the red building just across the street from the museum on First Street. So there were quite a few that came from that collection. You can see there's actually a ladder attached to the side of the building. And look at this fellow up here. He's did probably to unattach some of the wires so that the house can go underneath, or the building. Not sure, that looks more like a commercial building than a home. And this is another one that came from the Smythe collection, and it's very intriguing. What we think it is a high wire diving act, and here's this fellow going head first. We're presuming that he started at this platform there and is diving head first into hopefully a substantial thing of water. I certainly didn't read any accounts of any circus performers dying during act, so we're hoping that he survived just fine. But it's clearly Revelstoke. There's spelled Revelstoke right there. This is a really interesting photograph. This is taken of First Street East between Orton and Mackenzie, probably 1898. So what we're looking at here is there's a spire. Somebody actually drew lines over the outlines of some of the buildings. And that's not something I'd recommend. It also looked like they put their coffee cup on it at some point too. But you can see here a spire, and that was the spire of the St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church that was built at the corner of Mackenzie and First in 1893. And then in 1899 it was moved up the street to 5th and Mackenzie, which is where the Catholic Hall is now. And the C.B. Hume General Store was built at that location. That's now the Royal Bank location. So this area in here would be where the Regent is now. So there's really nothing much. Some possibly a little commercial warehouse or a commercial building or warehouse of some sort in there, but not a heck of a lot going on at that time. This is the corner of First and Mackenzie where the clinic is, also the Revy Outdoors and Conversations in that building. And I'm going to show you this next slide that shows that house. So this is the house that shows up on the corner in that photograph. So people were building houses there, and then it became clear that this was going to be, that first few blocks of Mackenzie Avenue was going to be the commercial area. So people who had already built houses there were moving them out of the area. This house actually moved twice. It had 3 different locations. It was the home of E.J. Bourne. The Bourne family, there was several brothers, and they had a general store here for quite a few years. But so this was E.J. Bourne's first home, right where Revy Outdoors Clinic building is right now. And then it was moved down the street to 608 Mackenzie, so between 5th and 6th Street on Mackenzie Avenue. And then sometime later, probably by the 1920s, it was moved around onto 6th Street at 104 6th East. So when we talk about moving buildings, this one kind of had a double treatment to it, but it's clearly the same building. It's a cute little photograph of the CPR watchman's house at Cut Bank. Must have been a little noisy living there. They're right on the tracks. But the family that had the little house there, they obviously took great pride in their little cottage, and you can see the lovely gardens there. And apparently they would sell flowers to the passengers on the trains going by. It was a cute little cottage, just in a rather noisy location. This is a photograph of the display booth that was sent to the Calgary Dominion Fair in July of 1908. So they put together a good display of some of the minerals from the area. There's the containers of Revelstoke strawberries, because for quite a few years Revelstoke was known as a producer of strawberries, and that actually were exporting strawberries, especially to Calgary. You can see some taxidermy samples of some of the animals in the region. And then there's quite a few examples of work from some of the Revelstoke sawmill, and some really fine, they're calling it turnings, so turned work for fancy work on homes. There's a wall section in there as well. And then there's also photographs showing some of the amenities of the city, including the school at the time, and some of what else Revelstoke had to offer. So this would be the equivalent of the Chamber of Commerce doing a show at an exhibition. The warehouse of the Woolsey, LaFoe and Company store, and their store is where Royal LePage Realty is now, at the corner of 2nd and Mackenzie. But I'm not sure where their warehouse was, but it's a nice looking building and really cute little delivery cart that they had with their name on it. That was one of the early grocery merchants in town. These are some of the trucks of the Revelstoke Transfer Company on Orton Avenue in the 1940s. So this would be where a lot of people would remember it as the co-op building, so the bowling alley would be right about here. And it's a fellow named Gabriel Johansson, who was a blacksmith in the area. I believed he lived out close to Three Valley at one point. This is in the 1930s. The side view of the Holton House, about 1900. The Holton House was built, started construction in the fall of 1897 when Charles Holton married Lida Edwards, and it took a craftsman close to a year to complete all of the trims on the building. You can see it's always been known for those rounded veranda pieces and all of the trim on that. It's always one of Revelstoke's really fine heritage homes. But they weren't above hanging their washing out on the porch, just like normal people. This is one of the children of the Lida and Charles Holton, Brennan Holton, and a couple of friends, the Maley twins, tobogganing on Mount Revelstoke. This looks like just a regular, natural toboggan run, but they actually used to build wooden toboggan runs as well. Quite a few, quite often like on the CPR Hill area as well. This was somebody who had a marten farm in the area. We know that there was a marten farm a little bit south of Revelstoke near the Montana Slough area. These martens were named Bessie and Jock. Of course, there was a lot of trappers in the area who could make good money trapping and selling martens for their fur. Another house being moved. This is the one that's now at the corner of, it's at 415 Mackenzie Avenue, at the corner of Mackenzie and 4th. And it was built on Front Street in, I think, about 1914, and moved up to Mackenzie Avenue in about 1926. And you can see that they've removed the roof in order to move it and reattached it later, and the house is still recognizable. You can see that they've all thrown their coats on the edge of the porch there while they're doing the moving. This is just a cute photograph. Don't know exactly who the women are, but this was from the Holton collection. So Lida Holton is not one of those women, but it's probably friends or relations of hers. Probably just on one of the local steamboats, and it looks like apples that they're eating there. This photograph was taken by Michael Tomlinson around 1980, a cabin at French Creek, and I believe this was the cabin where they found the cedar bark chair that we have in our museum collection now. This is Jack McCarty, Blanche McCarty, Ben Dickey, Shella Dickey, and Topsy McCarty around 1919 with a cello. Most of those people were quite good musicians. Shella Dickey ended up with her career was as a music teacher both in Vancouver and here in Revelstoke. This is where we are now. This is the post office site. This was actually the Dickey home. They built their house here in 1899, and then it was later moved to 3rd Street West, and I believe the cross street is Pearson, but I'd have to double check that, or possibly Rokeby. But they chose the site quite a bit before they finally actually got around to construction. They finally started construction in 1926. But you can see across the street here, this is, that was Roy Smythe's pool hall. That building is still there. This is, this had been vacant for years. That's where Tantrum just built their bike shop. That house still exists, and then next to it is what is now Kevin's Kitchen. And the other side of the museum building, there was a house there that was later moved or torn down. This is another puzzle that came in recently. It was in a collection of photographs that came from the McKinnon family. And on the back of the photograph, it said one of the first hotels in Revelstoke, but there's no name on it. There's just a sign there that says bakery, and we haven't been able to determine if this even is Revelstoke or what building that could have been. So this one remains a mystery. These were some photographs that we acquired recently from Candy Potter. They were taken by her father, Lloyd Smith, showing the demolition of the Civic Center in 1979. And the Civic Center had been built in 1906 as the YMCA, and then it was later taken over by the Kinsman Club, and they were running it as the Civic Center. And then when they built the current community center, they tore down the old Civic Center. So there's some photographs of its last day. A lot of people still have fond memories of all of the events that went on in the Civic Center. And then there was also photographs from taken by Lloyd Smith of the demolition of the CPR station in May of 1978. They had already completed construction of the current station before they tore down the old one. This one was built in 1905. It was a beautiful brick station, and some of the bricks are in the front posts of our heritage garden. There's some other pictures showing the destruction. You can also see the original roundhouse that was still there at the time. That was gone now as well. And you can see that next to it, the new building. And the stack was still there until the 1980s, and that was removed as well. This is a photograph just showing the installation of the bear statues in Grizzly Plaza in 1987. They were designed by Bill Cameron and Fran Jenkins, and cast by Tom, can't remember his last name right now, who had a foundry in the Kootenays. Of course, they're certainly iconic part of Revelstoke downtown now. This is Victoria Road. This would have been in 1962. The Trans-Canada Highway opened in 1962. The bridge opened in 1971, and it was that time that they really opened up Victoria Road through here. So this would be where the roundabout is right now, and Nomad would be right here. And here's another mystery photograph. We've taken this one out for walks, trying to figure out exactly where it was. We thought it was somewhere close to across from the old school eatery and the distillery, the old high school area, but nothing's really matching up as to exactly where these houses were. So we're open to suggestions for those ones as well. And this photograph was taken on First Street East around 1927. This is where the Kawakubo is right now. And the two buildings on this side have been since torn down. That's where the little parking lot is now. You can see the tower of the original fire hall. It was built in 1899 and torn down in 1939 when they built the City Hall and now old Fire Hall. This is a little grocery store, John McIntyre grocery store at that corner. These were some photographs that were sent to us from the Campbell family. The Campbell had Hillcrest Dairy, and so Hillcrest Hotel, the name comes from the dairy that stood on that property for years, the Hillcrest Dairy. And there's Dan Campbell, and another photograph of him with his milk delivery cart. So that's the end of our presentation for today. Our next scheduled one is in April, and we'll let people know whether that will be another live one, or whether we'll be able to have an audience for that one, or whether we'll just do a presentation as we did today. Thanks, everyone. Are there any questions?